that starts to shift. So therefore, I've got to earn my worth. And what determines my worth, we start to categorize as when I've got this, when I'm doing that. Whereas if we can break down where that's kind of come from, then we can go, here's where it started. That core belief that I tell myself was never true, but I started to believe it when I was probably very vulnerable. My brain was molding and I was just this big sponge to everything that I heard, all of my experiences that started to shape the way that I now think. Now, we might be 30, 40, 50, 60 years old now trying to go, why do I keep repeating the same thing? It started back there when we concreted it and then watched each experience kind of build on that to make it really, really strong. So the process is being able to unravel that with compassion. We have to know that there's been this core belief, this negative, distorted, shaming-based message.
That was Jackson Golding, a psychotherapist and counsellor, and you've landed on the Me&My Health Up podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Hartcher. I'm a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. The purpose of this podcast is to enhance and enlighten your well-being, and that's why we've brought on Jackson Golding onto the show today to share with you his expertise in the area of psychotherapy and counselling. And we're talking about the topic of self-worth. And so you're going to find out more about how you can be more self-aware that you're lacking in self-worth and how you can go on your journey to find your authentic self and to become the best version of you so that people can love you for who you are. So without much further ado, I'd love to welcome you into the discussion I'm having with Jackson Golding. Welcome to the Me&My Health Up podcast show. How are you doing, Jackson Golding?
I'm doing really well, thanks. Thanks so much for having me on here today.
You're very welcome to come on. I certainly love talking about mental health, and particularly today we're talking about self-worth, and really keen to get your perspective and clinical experience on self-worth and what the listeners can do to improve that. But before we get into the episode, please share your story of how you've arrived at being a clinical psychologist and counsellor.
Sure. So I'll just correct you there, Anthony. I'm actually a clinical psychotherapist and counsellor. Won't go into all the specifics and the differences of all that, but essentially my journey is, it did start in psychology. And then, going further onto the psychotherapy, a bit more clinical in the underneath it all sort of thing. And I guess my part in that was before I knew self-worth, before I even knew any of this stuff, I was, I guess, a counselor before I even knew it. You know, I was kind of the go-to for everyone. I was the guy that you could get in trouble with. I was the guy that you could lean on. I was the guy you could, you know, just have there, and I would help and do whatever I could. I got really good at just being available and helping meet other people's needs. Didn't really think that was a problem, and probably got away with it in a lot of different avenues as we were really young and I was just doing what I was doing. The story behind that's probably divorce, but unavailable emotionally, you know, classic parents that I was like, well, where am I going to get my needs met? And I just thought I'll just be the guy. I'll be your hype guy and I'll be your friend and, you know, the best partner in the world. And that worked out really well until it didn't, you know. So then I guess it started getting into more, you know, loving, intimate relationships where I started to realize how much I needed to be needed. And I just do whatever it took. You know, we talk about the love languages. I wouldn't just give you your love language. I'd give every single love language and just, you know, give it to you all. So then later on, you know, a few relationships, probably big traumatic experiences in relationship was finally when I realized, like, oh, okay, maybe it's not them and me trying to fix and save and rescue and beg and plead and mercy with different parts of my life. I realized maybe there's something going on for me. And that's where I started to realize the whole probably codependency, you know, really needing to be needed. And I think that I would do whatever it took to sort of make sure I was that person, realizing that I was getting my esteem or my worth externally. And I was really dependent on that. So I wasn't able to kind of love myself. I needed others to be a part of that love. And here we are, you know, long time of work on myself, realizing that if I don't love me, if I don't figure out what it is that I need, what it is that my boundaries are, then I'm in trouble, and I'm going to keep searching for it externally and filling this void and not really quite understanding where it is that I need to kind of correct and love and nurture and comfort myself so that I can be my true, authentic self. And as a therapist, I think naturally, whether it's unconscious or not, I was like, this is the path. I'll just keep doing this. And I think a lot of us are in this space because of that. But yeah, I was really blessed to be able to start to get the therapy that I needed and really understand that no matter what we face, whatever struggle, whatever concern, whatever presenting issue that we have, whether it's depression, anxiety, addiction, PTSD, I think all of it, no matter what it is, comes back to how do we feel about ourselves and how do we show up in relationships. And that was definitely the case for me. So I really kind of created that space for the way that I live my life because it keeps me accountable, but it also is something that I can share and spread for others to be like, let's just get you to a place where you can look after you and love you and radically put yourself first.
Wow, what an incredible story that you shared there, Jackson. Certainly, it's like your career or your purpose found you, and essentially, through that journey that you went on.
For sure.
So in terms of self-worth, and you talked about that, loving self and being able to love yourself and being the authentic you. Where does someone start in that process?
Sure. Good question. Where do we start with that is, I guess, a lot of us are walking around with the light off, so until we can start to figure out where the light switch is in this dark room that we're in, we're going to keep fumbling. We're going to keep tripping over and we're not really going to know exactly where to go with things. We might, have glimmers of the light being switched on for split seconds being like, oh, I think it's my anxiety or I'm having trouble in my relationships. So, definitely for me, I'd go and try and figure that out and just work on that with someone. And then I kept missing the mark. So I think being able to start to identify and create awareness is a good starting point, because when we start to actually listen to some of the things that we're saying to ourselves and some of the beliefs that whether are common or old or frequent in our mind that we say that we're not good enough or we're not worthy or we're not lovable, these are our kind of invitations to go, what am I then doing with that? Am I seeking it externally and rushing to kind of be the best, have the most money, have the most friends, look the best, train the best, whatever it might be? Or do I again reflect and reach out and connect to be able to go, how do I recorrect this? I think awareness is probably the big first step, and them going, this is where it needs work. And what I've been doing and the patterns that I've been in isn't creating the solutions.
Okay, so that's that self-awareness piece. So being aware that essentially, you're judging yourself. You're not fulfilled in terms of what's going on. You're feeling that there's something empty, there's a void. And essentially, then what's the next step after that in terms of having that self-awareness? Is there a process that the listener or someone should go through in order to start making some progress and to start discovering this self-love?
So I guess the process for me, what I'm trying to do at the moment is really put together a model of self-worth, because there's lots of different theories and techniques and modalities out there that are helping thousands and millions of people. But there's this underlying part that I think gets missed and it'll just poke its head out somewhere else. So I think down to the core of it, if we can start really figuring out, essentially the old saying is we repeat what we don't repair, right? So if we're not repairing what's gone on, then we're going to keep repeating it in one way or another. The pattern is going to continue, whether that be going back into negative relationships, whether it's been doing that little bit of extra work because our boss wants us to stay back, like you name it, wherever there's that slip of I choose you over choosing me, that we can then start to go, where did this come from? Now, society generally has this idea that there's this underlying message of I'm not good enough, so we'll keep trying and achieving and doing and thinking. And I guess I look at that as a societal, but also individual, like trauma response. If I'm not here, how do I get here? And then what do I need to do to go and get it? So if we're constantly reacting in that space, that's definitely something that I used to do. I was a doer, I was like, yeah, I've got to get to there. And I really got to check myself these days when I do that, because it's like, is that urgency this vital and this important to do right now? What if I just stop and pause and think about what's going on? So I think being able to go, what am I repeating? What are my patterns? Where did this sort of start? The I'm not good enough message we weren't born with, so it had to have happened along the way. We start to look at the concept of when we're born inherently worthy. We're born valuable. And it's somewhere along the line, whether it's our upbringing or our society, that starts to shift. So therefore, I've got to earn my worth. And what determines my worth, we start to categorize as when I've got this, when I'm doing that. Whereas if we can break down where that's kind of come from, then we can go, here's where it started. That core belief that I tell myself was never true, but I started to believe it when I was probably very vulnerable and my brain was molding and I was just this big sponge to everything that I heard, all of my experiences that started to shape the way that I now think. Now, we might be 30, 40, 50, 60 years old now trying to go, why do I keep repeating the same thing? It started back there when we concreted it and then watched each experience kind of build on that to make it really, really strong. So the process is being able to unravel that with compassion. We have to know that there's been this core belief, this negative, distorted, shaming-based message that existed and still exists in my day-to-day life. So we can be compassionate towards that part. Then we're going to start to be like being able to identify the difference between when I'm thinking this way and I know it's distorted, rather than just going, I'm thinking this way, let's go and finish all of my tasks, all of these things that are due. It just gives that little bit of difference. So I think that's definitely one big part of it, right? There's lots of different factors, but I do think that understanding what's happened rather than what's happening.
Yeah, and you brought up a key point around human doing versus human being. So I thought that was a good point that you raised. Like today, we seem to be very much the doers and running around and not really present. We're just doing a lot and not very present with, like we're just going through, as you said, these sort of habits, these habitual patterns, and we just keep doing them and get into these cycles and ruts without sort of stepping out of that rut and looking down and sort of reflecting on what we're doing and why we're doing it. And you mentioned another key point, which is around this belonging and wanting to fit in. And earlier you said, one of the important aspects is to be yourself and to be your authentic self and to love who you are. They seem to be at two, like opposite ends in a sense that to fit in, you're morphing yourself to change, to fit into society or, so can you just talk a bit more about this?
Sure. The guy that sort of talks about this best, probably the trauma expert, he's like the king in my mind, named Gabor Mate. And he talks a lot about this sort of thing that you're sort of bringing up. And I think the two fundamental basic needs that we have as humans, like really survival-based needs, are authenticity. How do I be myself? How do I express what's going on for me? What is it that I feel that makes up my identity? And how do I kind of give that out and show up with that to the world? That's a very important fundamental need, right? So allows these spontaneous little children to run around and be children. The other most important need is the attachment. Without attachment, we would die. If we were born and we weren't looked after, at least in some sort of way of shelter and food and safety. So that is such a primary, fundamental survival-based need that also is crucial. We put a little kid in a little room where they've got to choose, do I be authentic or do I choose my attachments to my parents, my caregivers? They're going to choose attachment every day of the week, whether they like it or not. Unfortunately, yes, they'll survive, but what that sometimes means that those two things don't align, authenticity and attachment. If they don't align, then we get to choose, or we have to choose. We're forced to choose. And if we choose attachment, it means that I push aside my need or my absolute authentic ability to be me in order to be in relationship with you. So that might mean, for example, if I'm running around and my thing is to, yell and scream and have fun, but my parents really don't like that. So in order for me to stay in relationship with them and belong and be loved and be seen and be heard, I've got to dial that down. I've got to dial me down in order to be in relationship with you. But at least I survive. But then over time, when we look at bigger picture, a bit more macro, each relationship that we end up going into, each job or societal sort of pressure or norms that we sort of start to acclimatize to, is this underlying thing is I've got to choose relationship, attachment, and belonging over being authentically me. In fact, being authentically me might get me in trouble. That's the big problem, right? Is being able to, how do I gel these together and align them together in a really beautiful way? This is where we kind of look at self-worth. Say that message of choosing attachment over authenticity meant that I'm only worthy when I'm in relationship, or I'm only worthy when I've got that attachment, that belonging, that love, that being heard, that being seen identity. So how can I start to look at doing me and expressing myself in the way I am and what I need and what my boundaries are to be me, and pretty much the instruction manual of how you be in a relationship with me so that I can have the best of both worlds. Because we need attachment. We always will. We're meant to be with each other. We're meant to be in relationship and connection. We're also meant to be able to be us, be who we truly are. So I think the big thing is that big significant point, but we had to play that role in order to survive. So we play a role self, and we continue to play that role self rather than a true self. And that sort of balances itself out into today when we're big kids, we're adults now. There's still that role we play. Is I will choose this so I can stay in relationship with you when that might compromise me putting myself and looking at what it is that I need and I want in my life.
So what I gathered in terms of what you've said, if I were to distill it, essentially there's stages. And if I look at and sort of generalize when I'm reflecting on this, is essentially that first stage is about that connection, belonging. And essentially we want that attachment because it's really core for survival at that early stage. And then we continue that habits into like adulthood, early adulthood, essentially. And that is then termed or labeled as people pleasing, essentially we're doing things for others to ensure that they love us or, we stay connected to them. And then I'm thinking that third stage is what is labeled as the midlife crisis, where you get sick of people pleasing and you decide, I've had enough of this. I'm unfulfilled. I'm actually going to be myself. Have I got a right sort of perspective of what you're sharing?
Yeah, that's the lucky side. If the midlife crisis means, you know what, I don't care what anyone thinks, I'm going to do me. That's a cool outcome. Whereas quite a lot of us, because of that inability to be ourselves, will turn to drinks. We'll turn to addictions in our shopping, in our drugs, in our sex, in our relationship. We'll start being resentful. We start being exhausted all the time because we're not letting this part of us out that needs to be out. And we're so sick of doing all these things, like you said, for other people, that a lot of the time it ends up in that despair, not letting this little legend out or authentic version of myself out more. They're going to get depressed and they're going to think it's going to spill out of us, whether that be the depression, our anxiety, our stress, our physical conditions, even that locking that part of us away for too long will show up later. It just does. And if we don't try and go, hey, sorry, it's been so long. I've been attached to this role that I've needed to play, that I thought I needed to play. That's built on this really old message based on my experiences. I apologize. Hope you understand why I've needed to do this, but let's become more of a team. Let's get where we need to go, because you are worthy and you do deserve the life that you want to live, whilst trying to live in a society that, puts up these walls and hurdles the whole time.
So essentially your work is actually bringing forward that midlife blessing where people actually become their authentic self, or as you said, they either, if they don't become their authentic self, they look for fulfillment through addictions, which are alcohol, drugs, sex and whatnot, or an affair, for example. So they're looking for fulfillment externally as opposed to looking within for fulfillment. And what you do is essentially avoid that, or bring forward that midlife blessing to essentially so that early as possible in life, you actually become your authentic self. You love yourself. You love who you are, and you're living the life. Essentially, you're brought here to live.
Absolutely. Like the people that come and find me might be presenting with hold off has done. What the discrepancy or the inability to kind of be who they want to be has created such turmoil in their life. So I might be for people that are rocking up wanting help with their addiction or helping with their depression or being re-traumatized in their new relationship. We can identify that. We can help you get that to where it is. And there's lots and lots of people doing that, which is amazing. And so grateful that that's something that we've now got. That is more known and people are reaching out more and more and more. I think that missing link is, have we looked at whether or not this is because of the fact that there's this part of you that really doesn't think they're good enough, that doesn't think they're lovable, significant, I guess worthy of support. Like those things we can then go, hey, well, that started somewhere and this is no longer where we need to be. So we work on that presenting thing. Then by time goes on, we go, I don't see myself very well. I don't look at myself in a way of love, or I'm so codependent on my relationship to my work, to my partner, to the money that I'm making, that if I took all that away, my answer would be I'd not be all right. That's what we want to try and get people into. If we took all your things away, all the external stuff, How do we get you to the point where you can do you and you can feel good for that and that just be enough? So you can just be a human being rather than a human doing.
Fantastic. Awesome. Really enjoying this discussion, Jackson. Now, in terms of that earlier point that you corrected me on around this psychotherapist, because the listeners will be thinking, I really like what you're saying, Jackson. It's really resonating with me. You know, I said, a psychologist, and you said, no, I'm a psychotherapist. Now, is that like the differences between a nutritionist and a dietitian, where the general public have got no idea? But in terms of if they've seen a psychologist and haven't really progressed anywhere, and they're sort of thinking, well, maybe what Jackson's sharing is something I need. And so can you just sort of share with them how a psychotherapist works differently to a psychologist?
Sure. This is a complex one. You know, I might rub shoulders with a few psychologists that don't love the answer I give. But at the end of the day, we're all trying to help. We're all trying to do what we can to help. I think that the psychotherapy side of things, and again, a lot of psychotherapists don't sit in this boat either. So I guess all I can speak to is my experience and what I sort of see it as is there's that ability to work on what we're working on, whatever you present with, and be really led by the person. So I find that psychotherapy is much more of a relational based work. You can try whatever you want, evidence-based stuff, and it's all there for a reason. But if you don't have a relationship with somebody, then with like safety and rapport and trust, then how are they going to get anything from what it is that you've studied? Right. So I guess that's always my premise, is if we can really figure out, how do I build connection with you and then be led by you, step into your world, poke around a little, see where we're at, but then also have the ability to step out, then that creates this trust, this ability to kind of feel safe, so that then we can enter into like the more psychotherapy part of it, which is going a little bit deeper and understanding the whole picture, what all this had to do with all of this. And I think the way that I look at it is the way that I kind of talking about my kind of therapy now is I believe in people. I'm a believer for them. I'm their hype guy, because they might not have had that. They might not have a lot of people in their corner on that side. So if I could say, we can get you where we need to get you, and I believe that, then it just allows people to start to go, hey, I can challenge this old way of thinking, and I can now start to shape into this isn't something I've ever challenged. I've just gone, keep working, keep hard, doing this pitch perfect sort of model of what a human's meant to be. Whereas we start to go, hey, it doesn't need to be that way if you don't want it to be. So I think that probably the big difference of the things is we're much more of a broader scope, holistic scope, relational scope. And then the other big difference is Australian psychologists versus psychotherapists is we don't have Medicare rebates. So you go to your general GP, they do your mental health plan, that covers you for a psychologist. I think the issue there is they then find you their list of psychologists, send you there. Most of them have a big long wait list, some don't, but then also you're relying on a GP who is a general practitioner who might not have a real complex idea of what it is that you're going through and what it is that you need specifically. So the way I always encourage everyone to look at everything is, if you were going in for heart surgery, you'd want to know your heart surgeon. It's the same with our mental health. You want to know who you're about to go and talk to, So if they don't have a place for you, can have a discovery call to see if they're picking up what you're putting down and actually resonate with what you're talking about. Jog on, call the next person, actually try and see, I'm about to share. I want to get where I want to get to. This is just as important as my physical health. So, that's the part was like, sure, go to GP, get your mental health plan, and gets you that little bit of rebate, or find a psychotherapist or counselor like myself, but do your research, do what you need to do to find that space that's going to work for you, rather than, unfortunately, a lot of people are like 3-4 therapists down and then over it. I'm not doing this again. Or they're like, this is my last chance, and come in quite, naturally and rightfully so, a bit wound up by the whole process. So hopefully that answers your question, Anthony.
Absolutely. And I can see the parallels between a nutritionist and a psychotherapist, versus a nutritionist and a dietitian. So the dietitian's covered by Medicare rebates. And then if you look at the nutritionist, they're very client-centered. They look at the whole picture, and they've got that coaching rapport element versus a dietitian, which is, in parallel to the psychologist. So I could actually really relate to what you're saying, and I hope it really helps the listeners understand in terms of the different professions, and obviously the listener chooses what they want, but I totally get what you're saying. It sounds very, very similar. So, and Jackson, how can the listeners best connect with you?
Look, I think at the moment, seems like my Instagram seems to be a fun place for people to connect, and which is just Find Reason Therapy on Instagram. If you don't have Instagram, my website is the same, www.findreasontherapy. I think the good thing about that space is I'm kind of creating community, creating a connection crew, as I call it, where you'll get the resources and you'll get some stuff, but you'll also be a part of people that are self-worth thrivers. You know, they're wanting to look at this stuff. They found this space because they want to keep going in it, whether they join for therapy or whether they're just there to get some quick tips and tools. That is what it's all about. So whether it be my Instagram or I guess my website or just chatting over to me by email, you can get lots of different resources. The easiest way to kind of get a better idea of me is I've just written a book called Find You. So it's a radical guide to putting yourself first. Now that sort of thing is just a really good entry level for people that might not want to fully commit to counseling, that just want to get what they want to get, understand self-worth, understand how they show up in relationships, and just start to do a little bit better in themselves. Really simple. Love to hear from some people from you.
Fantastic. Well, I will include those links, Jackson, in the show notes. So listeners, just go directly to the show notes to find those links to Jackson's Instagram page, his Facebook page, Instagram, website, and thirdly, his ebook links. So really appreciate you coming on the show, Jackson. It's been very insightful, and really like the work that you do and essentially how you help people become the best versions of themselves.
Yeah. Well, it's been a pleasure, Anthony, and I'd love to have you on my podcast as well. I think that'd be really cool to keep this chat going. It's been great to kind of connect with you, man.
Absolutely. I'd love to be part of your podcast, and I'll certainly take you up on the opportunity. And to the listeners, thank you for tuning in to another insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. If you've really liked this episode and enjoyed it, please share it with others that could also benefit from listening to Jackson and what how he helps those to discover their true self-worth, their authentic being, and to become the best versions of themselves. So please get it out there, share it with others, so we can actually create a world where everyone's being the best version of themselves, living who they truly are, and that's who we can truly love, is that authentic person. So thank you for listening. Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand Me&My Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. Me&My Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, Me&My Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast, and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of Me&My Health Up.